Welcome to Local Authors. I'm your host, Ian Parkinson, and I'm pleased to welcome a newly published, the paper's still hot off the presses, local author and resident, Anne Mitchell. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here, Ian.
So, spoiler alert, the key on the tree, the title is actually explained inside the book. So if you want to find out why there's a key on the tree, buy the book. What prompted you to write it?
Well, I think in my local government career, really there's a lot of books that I've read that are very academic in nature, and they're good. Don't get me wrong, but I really think there needed to be a more anecdotal understanding of what governments I had worked in, the different municipalities, and I wanted young CAOs and senior leaders who are thinking about being CAOs to understand the depth and variety of the job, the uniqueness of it, and I think for the public too, because there's still so much misconception or understanding the role of council versus the role of the CAO city manager. So I think that's one of the things I really wanted to highlight for people, that this job is so unique and it's been an amazing career, and there's been so many things. I could have written probably 16 books because there's so many things that happen that you wake up in the morning and you have a plan for your day and it just goes out the window and you just have to learn to roll with it and move forward.
Yeah, I enjoyed reading it so much I had to read it twice. And going through it, a lot of the personal anecdotes actually make a lot of sense as to the whole flow of municipal management.
Yes, and I think it's really interesting because I've always said to young people that I mentor that if you wanted to start out, I didn't plan it, and I always say I don't think I chose the communities, I think the communities chose me. And I think that every community that I've been in, and this is my 5th, but I think every community has given me so much and learning and understanding. The very first community was so amazing because it was a bedroom community to the city of Sault Ste. Marie in Northern Ontario. And it was a very good starting point for somebody who did not know much about the role of CAO, because a lot of the services were provided from the city. So there was a lot of things that we did there. But then the next role, wow, I wanted something more challenging, and I ended up being the CAO on Peely Island for 4 years. And be careful what you wish for, because it was so very challenging. So Peely Island was this island that had 3 islands put together by somebody in 1888. So they had an elaborate drainage system. They had ferry transportation issues. They had wineries. We had to deal with VQA issues. So there was such a multitude. There was loss of taxation due to conservation. Like, it just went on and on and on. So when you say, I want something more challenging, be careful.
Yeah, you have to be a little more specific in your request.
Exactly.
Is the chief administrative officer or the city manager roles, in reading your book and then the other book where you have the article here about Sue Lookout, there doesn't really seem to be an academic process officially.
Yes, and I think that you'll see trends back and forth on how they hire city manager. Sometimes they feel like they will draw from the military, but often council, and no disrespect to politicians, but it's not really their forte to hire, and that's what the city manager's in charge of operations. I've always said to council, when you hire, you can hire from different disciplines, and traditionally in the day, city managers would come from engineering, finance, or whatever, and depending on their personality and type of educational background, they would make a different type of CAO, city manager. But what I've always said to councils is you've got to be very open about what you want in that city manager. Is your municipality at a point where you need a lot of change? Then you need need to hire somebody who has that ability. But on the other hand, the city manager also has to be honest in the interview. Do not tell that counselor what you want them to hear. Say, this is my skill set. I'm a change maker. I'm a collaborator. Is that what you want? Is that the fit you need? And obviously you have to do your research too. Yes. And make sure you fit with that municipality. But laying out expectations and very clear expectations in the interview process before you even hire. I think that's key.
It is, because I think with a lot of municipal councils, sometimes they don't really even know what they want.
Yes. Yep.
I have to admit, I've always had a personal hesitation with strategic goals. However, having gone through both your books and watching City Council in the last 3+ years, the strategic goals now make sense to me why you have them, because, yeah, it's way off in the future, 5, 10, whatever, but at least you've got a target.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of politicians and the residents don't really understand why there's a need for that target.
And I think it's really critically in that, as somebody in my position, I listen very deeply and very intently to council and to what they're saying and to what they're not saying, yeah. And to understand them individually but collectively, because we work for them collectively. But the strategic vision gives me an idea as the head of the organization of where they want to go. And then I have the unenviable task of trying to figure that out and move the team forward to get that done. So it's always a back and forth, and you're also advising council. So it's this synergy of a leadership team, and that's how I look at it. You know, myself and council, we're a leadership team together. We don't really care where the good ideas come from. We just like to make sure they happen so we can make our community better. Yeah. But always keeping in mind that when there's an election, which we're coming up to one next year, you may have a completely different vision and mandate. And one of my municipalities in Ontario, I went from this council was here and this council was over here. So you need to pivot, and you need to say, this is what I'm doing. One thing I've noticed about municipalities, certainly our size and larger, and I noticed this before, sometimes they get overly bureaucratic and they run in spite of council. And I'm a firm believer of, we are here to implement council's vision. Yes. And yes, the day-to-day stuff has to happen, the roads have to get plowed, etc. But being mindful of what is a strategic goal, that always needs to be right here all the time.
Yeah, and you're also in the unenviable place of sometimes having to say to council, I don't think we can afford this.
Yes, and you have to have courage and you have to be brave. And the really good municipal professionals, that they step up and they say, we can do that. However, if you want to do this, we've already got a full plate. You have to be realistic. You have to give them the best advice ever and apolitical. Yeah. But then you have to say things that they don't often want to hear, which is, we can't do that, we don't have the budget, we don't have the manpower, we don't have the workforce.
Yeah, so it's how do you see now I'm going to change track here. The city manager, to me, is kind of a administrative leader, a sounding board for council. But to a degree, you also have to be a bit of a lawyer, because you have so many different legislative documents you have to deal with. I mean, the Municipal Government Act, most people understand, because every municipality is was birthed out of the province. They're responsible to the province. But you've got your municipal bylaws, municipal policies, provincial legislation and policies, and then federal. That's a minefield.
It really is, and you have to know all of them, and you have to be familiar with all of them. And you also have to understand, if something's not working, how is the policy affecting us? Time changes too, right? Yeah. And everything changes. So you have to continually be looking at bylaws, policy. Do they need to be updated? Do they need to be rescinded? Do we need a new policy? For example, we had to put in a respectful code of conduct for the public because of the rise we're seeing in incivility. So not only do we have to follow the policies, we always have to keep testing them to make sure they're valid. And if and when, what other policies do we need? We operate under bylaws or resolutions of council. That's how we get our direction to do our work. Otherwise, you have 9 people who may have some different views, and then one would want to go this way and one might want to go that way and 3 might want to go that way. So that's why the system works like it does, Ian, because we work for council as a collective through resolution or bylaw. Yeah.
And I mean, the bylaws, it can be a bit mind-numbing sometimes, I think, but if I recall, I've come across, when I've been doing some research for other issues, when I've used the city's bylaw search engine, some of them come up that are handwritten.
Yes. Some of the things, I will tell you, when I first started, I asked why something was being done, and they said, well, that's under policy so-and-so, and the policy was from 1973. So unfortunately, when we're doing the work of delivering municipal services, policy should be reviewed every 3 to 5 years, but it's one of those things that every municipality, it's sort of like, we'll get to that eventually. But we've done a lot of work, and I'll be here 2 years in February now, in trying to update policies and make sure we have the right ones in place, which is a lot of work, but actually I really like that part because that's how we operate.
Well, there's history there too. So you can actually see where the process that you've walked into has evolved since 1905.
Yes. Well, the one policy was 73, so it wasn't too bad.
We're now in a generational change where the last of the boomers, if they haven't retired, will probably retire very soon. A lot of the senior municipal staff are, for a better word, boomers, born between 1945 and 1960. So do you see a difference in the younger soon-to-be city managers as they come up through the ranks?
I do, and I mentor quite a few of them across the country. And one thing I've noticed, and it's not just city managers, but the younger generation of leaders in local government, I will say, really are looking at more of a work-life balance. And I fear that we may lose some good quality people because of that. Good for them because they just look at work differently. And they are, but one thing that may keep them in the public sector, and I'm very hopeful about, is they need to, generally speaking, they like to do work that feeds their soul. And that is great because public service is work that feeds your soul. Because you're doing it something for the good of the community, you're there to serve. And if we're there to serve, that is something that is a good reason to get up and go to work every morning, which this younger generation needs more than we did. We were happy to work and work and work. And it's just a little bit different mindset. What I love about my job is that I get to deal with intergenerational. And I love seeing the effect of the younger generation, the older generation, and the way they all work together and collaborate. And that's what makes a really good, diverse organization. And it's a more healthy organization, too.
I have hope for the future.
I do.
You mentioned mentoring, and you have an article in the Role of City Managers book, but mentoring is a common theme through 35 different authors. I understand the advantages of mentoring, but it's usually me with a younger employee who's going to be doing the same role I am in the future. But with a city manager role, a lot of you not only move around on a fairly regular basis, So your mentoring is probably not face to face.
No, and I love technology because of Zoom. And I like to think of it can be a very lonely job because you are the boss. And you are also that pinch point in between council staff. And then you've got outside people that you deal with too. But I think CAOs, because of the uniqueness of the job, we like to meet and talk because we can compare and find best strategies, but we can also, I don't want to use the word commiserate, but there's a general understanding of the role if you're talking to other CAOs. So one thing that I notice a lot of us do who've been around for a bit, we are very, we want more good people in local government because that's, we need to continue that. So I found a lot of older CAOs are very open and willing to help younger CAOs in the role. And sometimes, like last week, I had a young CAO and she just said, Anne, can I have a half an hour of your time? She ran into an odd anomaly. It wasn't something she felt comfortable talking to her staff about, but talking to another CAO. And this happens quite frequently,
Peer support.
Yeah, peer support, absolutely.
I mean, it's valuable because the more mature CEOs, city managers, they've spent time in the trenches and they've been ambushed or bushwhacked. And, you are the boss, so you've got to maintain that persona that you know what you're doing, even when you don't. Absolutely. So that's when you pick up the phone and go, Anne.
Help. Yes. Well, I remember even early in my career when I was trying to close a landfill and turn it into a transfer station, how? So I put out a plea to my CAO group, and all of a sudden I got a call from somebody near Muskoka. They had done it. They said, here's what we did. Here's the RFP. Here's what we did wrong. Here's what, and because the job is not municipality to municipality, traditionally are not in competition, they're very open and giving. And that's what I love about this job too, the role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not a 9-to-5 job either, is it?
It's like 24/7.
Especially when it snows.
Yes. Yes. Or any other disaster.
When you were in your role as city manager for Sioux Lookout, and this was back in the early 2000s?
2012 to 2018.
Okay, so you got involved in cooperation with the local Indigenous First Nations. So you must have been one of the leaders because the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had just come out at that time.
Yes, I put a report forward. The Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action had just come out. I believe it was 2015, and we as a municipality understood the importance of the Indigenous relationship. We had 30,000 First Nations north of our community who used our hospital, our airport for healthcare services. And we were the first municipality that adopted a Truth and Reconciliation Committee of Council. We had a friendship accord with 2 of our First Nations, and by the time I left, I think there were 4 that had signed on, and we had ongoing conversations which led to a lot of different really exciting economic development opportunities. So we were one of the first ones, and we thought it was so important, and I learned so much through that process. It was amazing. It was an amazing 6 years.
The one piece of it that struck a chord with me was the fact that you moved some of the city offices downtown.
Yes.
And then shared space with your MP as well. And a lot of the First Nations had their own administrative people in that building.
Yes.
And
we made space for that, and it was really critical. We had a couple of buildings downtown that had been refurbished in, downtown revitalization is such an important piece of any community. But we put our economic development, moved them out of City Hall and downtown. They had an opportunity to work with the MP. And remember, everybody, we deal as municipalities with the province, but the First Nation deals with the federal government.
Yes.
So we made sure the MP was there. And we also opened up office space for any of the chiefs, and some had economic development people, but some didn't. And we made sure that space was open. And you know, proximity and synergies, you should have seen the amazing things that came out of it, like the economic development projects that we did, just working together. We did a $17.5 million airport expansion. The Sioux Lookout owned the municipality or the airport, but the First Nations completely and utterly supported us, as did our MP and our MPP, which is same as MLA out here. But that never would have happened without that support and without starting that process of putting everybody in the same area and having these ongoing conversations.
Yeah, I remember reading an article that in a lot of the international conferences or treaty signings or diplomatic meetings, that there's more issues are resolved over cocktails and coffee than is ever done at the table.
Yes, and you know, one of the things that I think it's in the book, but I always remember our nearest neighbor was Lac Seul First Nations, and Chief Clifford Bull. He's such an amazing leader, and we would be in these meetings, and of course, I'm like a doer, and let's do this and do that. And he said, Anne, he said, you are trying to rush us down the aisle, and we're only on our first date.
Yes. That's a very appropriate statement. It makes a lot of sense.
Yes. It taught me patience.
Well, I mean, there are cultural differences that we don't quite understand until you're actually involved inside them.
Yeah, and you had to understand greater things too, Ian. Like, we wanted to do a communication protocol out of the Friendship Accord, but understanding that the way they communicate with their community members is different.
Yes.
And so we just went, okay, that's fine, because we are very process driven, and that's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea.
So, what does the future of the CEO city manager look like now we're moving solidly into the 21st century?
I worried when I did my first batch of research and it concentrated on the CAO relationship with council. One of my biggest worry was that there weren't enough young people getting into this role. And that's, you know, one thing I found out was there was a lot of younger people passionate about the role, which made me happy. But I do worry about the incivility and the rise of incivility because it's such a public-facing role, and, you know, you're at the apex of the organization. So are there going to be people that want to, you know, sign up for it? I don't know, and I think people just have to remember, and we're still human beings.
Yeah. You get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
You do. And we're all here doing our best to provide municipal services. We understand that everybody is, you know, living in a time where there's not a lot of extras, money's tight, we're in an affordability crisis. But I worry that we're going to lose good people, both, not just in the city manager role, but running for council too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, I mean, even the city as a whole, I mean, as I move through City Hall occasionally, there are a significant number of young people. So there's
hope.
The resource there. Yeah, it's us old folks have got to remember not to piss them off.
Well, there's hope, but the only thing is the top job is the most difficult job, and are people ever going to strive for that, which we want them to? Yeah. But you're also the lightning rod.
Yeah, is that the theme of your next book? How to develop a thick skin?
I already have it.
Is there another book in your future?
Yes, there is. This one's going to be a doozy.
Oh, I look forward to that one.
This is my last 4 municipalities, and this is my 5th.
Okay.
So
it's going to be that thick? When did you write the book?
That was interesting. You know, we talk about mentors, and I have a really good mentor, and she started her own HR company in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and her name's Barb. And I love her because when I was younger, and, you know, you say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I used to write novelist. because I always wanted to write. And then I never found time to write. So Barb, when I finished my master's, I was talking to Barb, and she said, "You want to write? Keep writing." She said, "Keep writing until you go to do your PhD. Just keep writing because you're in the academic mode, so keep going." So I woke up every morning at 5 a.m. and I would work from Monday to Friday, 5 to 6:30, and I wrote the book. And so I try to do that, but I'm too busy right now. But I get back into the routine on the weekends of writing, but having a schedule for writing and sticking to that schedule because it is important to me.
Yeah, because there is a very large depth to the detail in your book. You didn't just sit down one afternoon and write it.
No, it was over probably an 8-month period. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big time commitment.
Yeah. And it was hard to figure out what to leave in and what to. There was a lot, like I said, there's a lot more stories, and then after it was done and when I reread it, I said, "Oh, I should have talked about that. I should have talked about this." So.
Well, so there may be a sequel.
Volume 2.
Okay. You spend a lot of time in education. Obviously, that's valuable to you in your professional career. But it sounds like it's also a personal thing to you.
Yeah, it really is, Ian. I think I went to academia. Like I finished my university, but I went back when I was older, which I thought was really interesting because I knew the local government side, but then I was also studying it. So, and ironically, when they were asking me about it, they said, "What do you think, Anne, about why are you writing your thesis at this age?" I think I was 52 at the time. And I said, because I want to fix local government before I retire, which is delusional, I know. However, I really do see some things that could be corrected in the system, and I'm hopeful that the academic part will fix that. So if you write white papers, they're taken seriously by different, when people are looking at changing legislation. One thing what I'm studying right now during my PhD is special purpose boards. So I've always wondered about these questions through my career, and that's always been what I've studied. Right. So it's a personal thing, and I love learning, but it's also trying to address these. So the special purpose, the actual thesis question, when I get to that point, will be what is the loyalty? So if a member of council is appointed to a special purpose board, like the police commission or any other outside board, where's their loyalty? Are they there as a member of council, or are they there as the police commissioner? Because watching the truck driver protest in Ottawa, I very clearly saw a city member from the city of Ottawa trying to direct the police chief. And I know from my experience that that's a commission. There is outside legislation, all of those things. Right. So I started asking people questions in my field. What do you feel about that? And so I've got so many varying answers. And when I was fortunate enough to get the supervisor that I wanted at UVic, he said, "Anne, that's a good question. It hasn't been explored enough." So it's learning, but also trying to improve at the same time.
And it makes sense because, again, there's this friction between council and these special purpose boards. Because I've always been under the impression there's a councillor on that board just to know what's going on, not lead it. Because I think it's there again, that bridge between city council, kind of city hallish, the special purpose board, and then the community. Yeah. And I can see where some councillors, politicians, would want to be on the board because it's one of their pet projects. But I think a council leading a special purpose board could quite easily become a political arena.
Yes, and there's such a good book that's written on, they did a study in Ontario on special purpose boards and how the boards of health, and then they went out and became a provincial entity, but the hydro boards and all of that, and it kind of shows you the history of how they were developed and kind of gives you more understanding on local government. But I think that's why I do it, though, because I want to answer these questions.
I'd be very interested to read it when you finish it. And I'm even willing to buy the book.
It may be about 2 to 3 years, so.
Well, it's your doctorate thesis, so this is not something you can knock off in a couple of hours.
No. This is my weekends, and I don't golf.
Neither do I.
So I have time.
Yeah. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just appreciate the time because writing's my passion. And once I'm done this career, I have some other things, and I've got a few fiction books up there too as well, and I would like to do those. I do write a little bit of poetry, but the fiction ones I'd like to complete. I did find some historical stuff of my grandfather, who was a prospector, and I found his diaries from 1929 and 1930, and I'm working on transcribing those as well too.
Wow, that's back in the grizzled days.
Yes, it is.
Backpack and a hammer and away you go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming in, Anne. Good luck with your thesis. I look forward to reading it.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we'll talk again.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you for watching Local Authors.